When someone is successful or they're better than you in some particular way, or they're just something about what they do works better or more effectively than what you're doing, it can sometimes be kind of a natural human inclination, and sometimes there is some logic to it, that you'll think to yourself, oh, they're playing the way you're supposed to play. What they're doing is the best approach, and if I want to be good and I want to be as good as them, or I want to be better than I am now, I should copy their approach. I could take everything they do. I should focus on the same skills they have, or I should focus on the same strengths they have, or I should build my approach the way that they have, or that is the way you're supposed to play. Now, immediately we can start to add in some relative terms, like that person's style, first of all, might only be the best approach now and for them. Might only be the best approach now for them against specific opponents that they're playing at the top level now. Might only be the best approach for someone who's them, in as much as their skill set or their mentality for how the game is played, or their particular approach in terms of their philosophy on what you're meant to do in a game, and what should follow what, and what to prioritize, and what criteria you take to make a decision, or to harness this skill over this skill, and weighing all these things up. There's a lot of aspects in here that when you take away loaded terms like supposed to play, or that's the way the game should be done, and all these, actually it becomes quite a complicated topic. So what I want to talk about today is that it's true, there is a degree to which those people are doing things that are effective and whatnot, and that it's easy to see how a metagame evolves, and we should pay some heed to it, because anyone who actually does have the toolkit to do that, or the skill set to perhaps take some aspects of that, or copy this here, or see that this strength here is being undervalued by the community and they have it and they can do it, then yeah, those people can improve in that sense. But as a general concept, I want to talk about the idea of playing to your own strengths. The strengths that you uniquely have, or maybe not entirely uniquely, but they're unique to you in as much as those are your strengths, and this is your particular balance of them, and this one here and that one there, and it fits in with this mentality and this approach overall, and your experience playing this particular style. Because in general, in games and in life as a more general point, I think that point, that approach of playing to your individual strengths will benefit you more than copying even what seems objectively like a phenomenal style, like a great approach from someone else who maybe doesn't have your same skill set, and maybe might even have a completely 180 skill set and approach and mentality to you. Therefore, you might be less effective if you try and copy that right style, the one you should do, the one that's the way the game's meant to be played, all these loaded terms. So what sparked me to think about this actually is I like to collect good quotes. Okay, so there's a great quote by Euripides that says, "The wisest men follow their own direction." Now, actually, I'm going to now tie anyone who likes League of Legends. This isn't a League of Legends video, it's a general concept, but I'm going to talk about different players in different esports games. But I want to start with a League of Legends anecdote for you here, because I just find it personally amusing to tie Euripides, this great Greek thinker, to the League of Legends player Doublelift, who's like a skilled player, always been a very skilled player, very highly touted, mechanically skilled player over the years in League of Legends from North America. But famously, he's a guy who, he's not the most eloquent guy. He's not the best at translating thoughts, if he has wonderful thoughts in his mind, to the world in a way that makes you think, oh, what a great thinker, and oh, so astute. But actually, when I did an interview with him, my second grilled interview just after Season 3 Worlds, he made a point which is actually very astute. It's quite shrewd, actually, if you think about it, which was I asked him after Season 3 Worlds, and the context was he was one of the North American players who'd always kind of bagged on the European scene and said, oh, the European scene is behind the meta, and you know they play their own weird way, and that's not going to work when you play against top teams. And the key thing was, in terms of the context at the time, Korea obviously was the best by far, and so they set the meta. What they did was the meta. It's the way you should play. It's the way the game's meant to be played. They're the best. Everything's the best. And so Korea and North America's approach was to copy a lot of what the Koreans didn't, and sometimes just straight over copy it and not necessarily put too much thought to what was our skill set and how did it work on our personnel, and they just copy it. That must be the best. Try and be the closest you can to them. So when they saw Europe not doing some of these things and still having their own ideas about which lane to focus or how to play a certain way, players like Doublelift and other North American players thought to themselves, oh, well, Europe just hasn't figured out that's the way the game is meant to be played yet. So they're going to be worse and they're going to be behind. And obviously at this tournament, Europe far outreached North America, and actually a European team made the semi-finals, and Europe had a lot more success against the Asian teams and looked like a much better region overall in terms of matching up against these Asian teams who were obviously very, very good. And so Doublelift made the point that his conclusion the event had taught him was that it wasn't about there being this one style, like the Korean style, that you just had to try and copy and be as good as them at. Actually, what it was about was figuring out whatever your style is that fits your strengths and just going so hard at that that you try and perfect that. Because if you play that style to the best you can, then you will be effective and it can work. Now listen, it might still not be the best. It might not be the one that wins overall, but it'll be the best that you could do for you. It'll be the best that you could actually get to work that would be effective on your side. And so the reason this makes sense is obviously China had a totally out of whack meta and style compared to Korea. And some of the other regions like North America were doing a better job of aping the Korean style and copying what they were doing than the Chinese scene was. And yet the Chinese scene was much more successful in this tournament and had way more success even over against Korea. And so if you think about it from that particular respect, you get into a world where this is a point that will relate outside of esports as well, because that same sort of concept there is something that has been kind of a realization of my own life over my career. Because whenever people in AMAs or whatever ask me like, okay, how do I become an esports journalist? Like, what do I do? I never list them either like the standard thing of like, well, join this site here and then try and get some stuff published there and then do this here. I don't say that. Also, I don't say, well, here's what I did. I did this thing and then I did this thing and I did this thing. And that's the way. If you think I'm the best, if you think I'm doing really well, successful, then just copy what I did. I don't say either of those. What I generally always say goes along the lines of this. What you have to do is find something to do within esports journalism that you enjoy doing, that you find you can harness and make a craft and perfect, that only you could do as well as you're able to do it. Now that might sound a bit packed, a bit dense there, but the idea is once you get to be the best at that, the simplest way to put it is if you're Thorin and you find out what you like to do in esports journalism, and then you become the best at doing foreign work in esports journalism, eventually, if that's successful and people like it, then that's going to be as successful as you can be. And crucially, you're going to be the only one who can write that Thorin piece or that Thorin style in that way. No one else can do that in that way because they're not you. And so this is the approach to games that has to work. And I think if you look at some of the examples I'm going to give you now, you'll see that all these different players, some of them had like huge flaws. In fact, some of them I picked out. That's why I picked them out. They had huge flaws or huge aspects where in a metagame sense, maybe some of these things shouldn't work or they wouldn't work, but they managed to find other things that were strengths and build into those and perfect them to the extent that these were fantastic players and who've had success. So I'll start with a couple of League of Legends examples for you, and then we'll go into Quake and StarCraft. So the first one I'm going to pick is actually Insec, this jungler from South Korea. Now, the thing that has always made Insec famous, even back in 2012, was he had these sick mechanics and he was just going for this carry jungle style. Now, the problem was, Season 2 wasn't the carry jungle era really at all. St. Vicious did it a bit in North America, but in general, this was like the low econ diamond proc counter jungle invade style, or the supportive Snoopy, the odd one style. And so what he did was, those mechanics would go to waste in those styles. Like if you were trying to play the Snoopy style of jungling, those mechanics, and you can't really be the carry. It wouldn't work in that sense. You're supposed to be giving all your wraiths and etc. to the all the wolves etc. to the mid laner. You're supposed to be just ganking everywhere. Those super sick mechanics aren't going to be as useful or even as effective as some of those other players. But he stuck with his style and he got it, and he got him mechanically to an insane level. I don't think any other jungler, up until maybe Dandy's peak, ever got close mechanically to where Insec was in late Season 2, early Season 3. Like, the reason why it's the Insec kick is because people to this day try doing that ward kick with Lee Sin, and they're still not as perfect. They'll be smooth and they'll have the mechanical aspect down, but he's like perfect. It's just on and kick. There's no mistakes. His mechanics are flawed, and as a result, he's invented something that only he can truly do to the best possible level. Also, the key problem for Insec is his decision making was never very good. Like, actually, his decision making, his thought process on when to go into an attack, as in like, is this the right moment? Like, would this be totally effective now? Should I set this up more? Should I just let this go and say no, don't do it? Instead, because he wasn't that good at that, he created this style which essentially was, instead of having that hesitation and that doubt and trying to make the correct decision, because he wasn't very good at it, instead of trying and then just being a weak decision maker guy who'd make the right one, sometimes wrong one, he just developed this style where he would actively commit to ideas like, you know what, I'm going to go for this and no hesitation, I'm just going to go in now. And what's crucial was, because he committed to that, became good at it and effective, you saw in his Katie Bullett's team, and then later on, it's KTB at the time when he was the jungler, and then later on when he became the jungler of Starhound Royal Club, you saw that these teams were effective because since he was so good at it, they built their team around that. So they saw, right, if Insect goes in and he goes ham like that, we all follow him. And if he goes in like that, in fact, it actually freed up some of the carries in the sense that, okay, now I don't have to question when's the jungler going. I know that when Insect goes in, it's going all in. And I know that he has sick mechanics. And that as a result, the team was built around him, everything worked around him, and he was more successful than he would have been if he'd have looked at Dandy and seen Dandy as just flawless at knowing when to do something and how to set something up, and then the decision-making of what to do now and what to communicate to. Insect could never be that if he copied all that. He was being inferior, very subpar Dandy if he tried to do that. So instead, he developed his own style against his own strengths, and he perfected that to the degree he could and made it viable and made it effective and made it successful. And he wasn't as successful as Dandy, but he was successful, more successful than he would have been. Another League of Legends example, it's actually someone from the same team, and it's Uzi I, the AD carry from China, famously an incredible mechanical player, very, very strong. Now his style, if you know the context of his career, when he came up in Season 3 was actually when that hard carry, AD carry style was supposed to be the least effective, because there was basically, Eddie Carey had been so strong in Season 2 that nerfs and the way the other roles were played out meant that actually in Season 3, Eddie Carey was a lot less effective. And you saw that even the great Wei Zhao fell away a bit, and he was one of the only ones left. And then Doublelift was stuck in kind of Elo hell in North America playing for that team, and he couldn't do anything. And in general, around the world, you looked at most of the best teams, and a lot of them didn't have some super god-like AD carry. Some of them did. A couple of the Korean teams had some really good ones. But actually, a lot of the teams having success didn't. In fact, within Uzi I's own region, OMG were the dominant team that year in his region, and they had in theory, one of the worst of the top-level AD carries in his region. It wasn't a AD carry. Now, his style, though, was to be that carry style. Incredible mechanics, and crucially, this lane-dominant style. Like, every game, no matter the matchup and who I'm playing, I want to smash this lane and dominate the lane, and I want to dominate the CS. And in fact, because I want to dominate the CS, that's the only mindset I'm willing to have. And I'm going to take that to a level no one's ever gone to. And I'm going to challenge for every CS. So every time there's a CS and you step up, you get two choices. Either you take my auto attack, or you pull back, and I get the CS. It's up to you. You have the choice there. But I'm going to do it. So either I'm going to be attacking you and fighting you and beating you in trades, or I'm going to get these CS. Now, listen, here's the thing people don't know about Uzi I who didn't watch China. That didn't always work. In fact, sometimes that wouldn't be so great at all. Crucially, sometimes once he got out of the laning aspect, sometimes in team fights he wouldn't be so good. He would miss position. He would get caught and just killed instantly, and then the fight's over. Like, you know those fights where you've seen the Doublelift ones, if you saw IEM recently, where you just try to get a Doublelift and kill him, and if you can't, then he can kill everyone and can do great stuff. But if you'd gotten to him, then the whole fight would have been over immediately. Uzi I would miss position like that, actually. But crucially, he built this lane dominant style up to the extent that now people had to lane swap against him. Now he was just bullying people out. And now even the best ones like Name, etc., some of those guys couldn't just straight up lane against him. And so this style, again, he got this to be the best, and he became the best at it, and then his team could build around it. And luckily for him, by both of the Worlds tournaments, they managed to get teams around him that could make this, like, he was like the pilot of that ship that could then fly. He was the guy who was driving the race car, and it would go all the way. He was the engine of their success. But it wouldn't have been the case if he'd have just looked at like Wei Zhao or Name and these guys who actually tried to be more tempered and have a bit of the carry style and a bit more team aspect and a bit more patience and a bit more decision making. Again, he wouldn't have been successful if he'd embraced that. Instead, he looked at his own strengths and he said, this is what I can uniquely do. Only Uzi I can do this in this particular way to this level, and therefore I'm going to do it and no one can beat me. And it made him a successful player, made it to Worlds Finals twice. In Quake, there's some great examples here because Quake has such a versatile, wide spectrum of skills that you can have in the game. But in history, if you had to put a general trend across the best players of all time, the best players of all time tend to have really good aim, and they tend to be really good at taking fights and winning them, and they tend to be really good at kind of dominating their opponent when they're on top of them, and if you're on top of them, you just run up the score big time, big time. And so along came this guy called Rafa. He's a North American player, and this guy's skill level was, if you took all the rest of the best players of all times, you took like Cooler, you took like 0-4, Fatality, Toxic, whoever these guys, CZM, all those guys are either way more skilled than Rafa or at least a bit more skilled or quite a lot more skilled. Their skill level much higher and their style much more aggressive. And their approach, when they're ahead, hammer the opponent, just run the table on them, don't let them do anything. And so instead, this guy who didn't have such great skills in a game that is quite mechanically intensive and skill dependent because it's aiming and people can out aim you in certain battles, instead he had to build his style around that. Instead of thinking, right, I've got to just 24/7 practice rail and all I have to do is watch the best players and how did they set up the rail shot. Instead, what he did was he spent all of his focus trying to figure out a style that would be effective against having people who would always have better aim than him. And so his whole style was predicated on setting up repeated decision-making moments where it's not that he would outfight the opponent, but he would make the right decision every time. And so because he'd made the right decision 4 out of 5 times and the opponent had only made it 1 out of 5 times or whatever, he'd be the one getting the better of these fights. And he'd take a fight that under normal circumstances would be like 60-40 to him, and therefore the opponent with way better skill. Like the people he was facing were the godlike aimers. They were Cypher, who was fucking unreal level of aim. Avik, very strong physical player. He was playing like strengths. Kilson had sick aim, sick rail and LG aim. Even Cooler's aim level had gone up a whole bunch. He's playing these sick aimers, but he would make it so that in general when he played them, that's it, that 40-60 fight that they could take and overcome from the 40%. He would make it so suddenly it would be deceptive. Actually, it would be like a 30-70 fight. And so now even that aim would be just not enough and he'd just get the better of it. He'd just make the smart decision, or he'd set up a scenario where he'd set up a fight so that he could decide in the fight, like, this isn't going to go my way actually. And then he'd have an escape plan planned already. Whereas all the other great players, because they had this skill, this aim that they based their game off, they would instead think, well, I'm going to win this fight. And it's going badly, it doesn't matter, turn it around, hit the shot, win the fight. But because he knew he couldn't do that wasn't his individual skills, he had to tailor his game to go into a style that was totally different. He went in a totally different direction. And actually, in the first sort of half of Quake Live, he was the most successful player by far. He won all these IEM titles, all these like QuakeCon, all these different LAN events, and he was beating godlike gamers and really amazing players who previously had the meta style that you're supposed to do. And that in general, no one was playing the way Rafa did because no one could play how Rafa did. And so he'd found a style even in a game that it shouldn't work in. Now, Rafa's opposite in Quake Live was a player called Cypher. Now, Cypher's talent level is so high that to me, there's actually no doubt in my mind. In terms of Quake duelers, he's the most talented in the history of any version of Quake that I've ever seen. In fact, in esports in general, I think he's just one of the most talented, skilled players to ever play any esports game. The fact that Quake has so few players doesn't change the fact that he is like a once-in-a-lifetime genius player, which if you'd put into a Brood War or whatever other game that has a mechanical aspect, he would have been phenomenal and would have had some incredible skill. Maybe not successful because the games are different, but he would still have some spark of genius to his play. But the problem with Cypher was his play was just very fluid and very intuitive. And so when he came up in like 2008 in Quake 3 was when he really hit a peak form. The way he would play the game showed that there wasn't a whole lot of conscious decision making. It's like he just felt the flow and he went where he wanted, and his skill level had gone so insanely high thanks to his talent that he could just hit every shot, and he could break all the rules of how you're supposed to play ZTN and how you're supposed to control this item here. And he could just roughly go around, but instead he would just be going like, it feels like I'm just going to go here now, and I'll just keep my flow going, and I'm killing this guy here, and I'll come over here, hit this shot, pull back. And the whole thing was so fluid that it was incredible. But then the problem was, along came Quake Live, and Quake Live looked the same as Quake 3, but there were these crucial changes to it. First of all, rocket damage was like increased, so they could be used more defensively. Like you could just hit someone from around a corner and then they'd have to pull back, or they'd have to take damage to come in and aggressively attack you. And the time limit was reduced from 15 to 10. So whereas in 15 minutes, even if you killed Cypher a few times, his skill level and his aggressive style is so good that he's going to get back and he'll just keep fighting, and eventually he's going to win some of those fights. He'll get back in control, then he'll hammer a whole bunch of kills in and he'll win the game anyway. It doesn't matter if that happens at 4 or 5 minutes. In a 10-minute game, if that happens at 4 or 5 minutes, if the other person who's now got the kill and control plays defensively, now Cypher might suddenly only have 2 minutes by the time he sets up an actual fight. And now if he loses that one fight, that might be it for the whole game. And the other person might just run and they might just win even 1 or 2 kills up. So what Cypher had to do instead was look at his own skill set, and part of this was losing to Rafa that kind of trained him in this way, I think. And he had to realize that one of his unique skills was that he had the best rocket range in the world. Most players, let's say in-game context, you could shoot like 1 or 2 meters ahead of you. You shoot the floor to hit them with splash damage up from the rocket. That's the normal style most people use. And most people have a similar sort of range in front of their model where they can accurately shoot. Let's say it's 2 meters in-game terms. Then if it was 2 meters for even the best players, then Cypher's was 4 meters and could even be stretched out to like 5 meters. So he could use those rockets in a way no one else could. And when he did it aggressively, yeah, it looked awesome. He'd hit air rockets and all this sort of shit. But actually, when you thought about the changes to Quake Live, this is where he was able to apply it to his style and become near unbeatable and become a god. And to the extent that he dominated the latter half of Quake Live, to the extent you could actually say he was the greatest player ever when you look at the two halves combined. So what he figured out was with this defensive style, if he applied a bit of strategy, not the Rafa approach, but his own strategy of picking some fights and creating situations where he didn't necessarily just go ham, then he could actually constantly do more damage to the opponent than they could do to him without having to actually take the fight and then commit to dying. So he'd go into that situation where you'd be just around the corner and you'd be about to come round, but now his range is better than yours with the rocket, so he can just do some damage to you and then get out. And you can't even get a hit onto him. So he's hitting you, doing damage, and you can't do any damage to him. That means even when he's out of control, he can wear you down and then create a fight that is even, that he can get back in off. Or when he's ahead, he can just bully you off like that. And then if he wants to be aggressive on top of that, yeah, he can go and just run the score up like he used to back in the days. So adding in this his own version of strategy, his own style, this inculcating this and integrating it into what he wanted to do with his toolkit, he was able to become the dominant player. Now, I've got one last example for you, and this is a StarCraft example, because along the lines of the Rafa case I gave before, in Brood War, one of the main tenets of the game was that if you were going to be an elite world champion level player, you had to have pretty good mechanics. It's a game where famously people would brag about APM and sick mechanics, and we only really had one player up to that point who wasn't that great mechanically, who'd been dominant, which was the player I Love Uvi, but crucially, I Love Uv played Terran, and he pioneered the macro style. So people weren't so great at macro, they didn't understand it as well, how you could abuse macro. So he kind of abused that gimmick to get incredibly good and win a lot of tournaments. And he was able to overcome not having such sick mechanics. And in the Terran race in particular, you didn't necessarily need it to the same degree you did, unfortunately, in this case, with Savior. This is the player we're going to talk about. He was playing Zerg. And Zerg was one of the most mechanically demanding races. I'd say the most, actually. Because the way you had to manage the lava constantly to get your army up, and then the way you had to move massive amounts of army around and be very quick and mobile, it meant that you had to have sick mechanics if you were going to be good. And crucially, no Zerg, when Saber came along, was really winning. There'd only been 2 who'd really ever won. Go Rush had won with just sort of a fluky, one-off, great run, where he'd managed to overcome Nada. But the only really great Zerg player, aside from Yellow, who'd been this low econ style player, was actually July. And July had won OSLs on the basis of having godlike mechanics, super sick APM, insane skills that he could just abuse you with, and you didn't even understand. Normal Zerg's not supposed to be able to beat him with that build and that style and that timing, but he could because his skills were that good. But the problem with that is, if you're Savior and you come along and you're not that skilled a player in that sense, you can't learn from that. There's nothing, you can't copy that. It won't work for you. And so instead, what Savior managed to do was become the best Zerg of all time, at least up until the J-Dog era, so up until 2009 or whatever, and some would even argue still, become the best Zerg of all time and be incredibly successful, make 5 MSL finals in a row, winning 3 titles, win an OSL. He was able to do all of this in an era when he wasn't that skilled as a player. He was facing all these Terrans in an era where Terran was quite imbalanced because the maps favoured Terran so much. And what he did was, he pioneered his own strategical style that no one had ever seen before. He would create builds and create moments, like the Rafa example I was giving, decision-making moments where they weren't the normal flow of how the game played out. Like, he would create a situation here where everyone who played the game, the Zerg and the Terran, knew, okay, at this rough timing here, he wants to delay me from attacking, he knows that I'm going to attack, the Terran would know, okay, the Zerg knows that I'm going to attack his base at this timing, roughly, based on our 2 builds. And so his approach now is either he has to defend his base and hope that he can hold, or he has to come to me and attack and kill me now so that I can't do it. And so in particular scenarios where there'd be like a black and white example like that everyone else was just playing into, Savior would instead use like brilliant skirmish tactics of warfare to like create a situation between the two. So the enemy of the army of the Terran would be coming out, and he'd be thinking, oh, he's just going to hold now, or he's going to attack me and try and go for the fight. And instead, Savior would sometimes do like delay tactics of like set up a little ambush here, and then that would lead into it. Even if you got through that, there'd be another weird ambush over here, and then these troops here have actually sacrificed purposely to allow someone to come in behind here, and then waste time here or kill off some of your units here. And what you wouldn't be realizing was, while this was all going on and you'd seem like, oh, I'm getting the better of that, it was annoying but I got over it, actually maybe he'd just delayed his tech or he delayed his build, that it'd just get to a level where it was never getting to for other Zergs. They were getting killed outright or they were trying to win the thing. And so he'd have all these genius plans within plans, and not all of it consciously before the game. Yeah, the builds would be clever, but some of this would be just in the battlefield making these decisions. That because he was able to do this, he was able to defeat more skilled opponents in a more imbalanced era of maps that aren't even supposed to work for Zerg, and defeat them time and time again and become an incredibly successful player because of this particular style. And again, this is an aspect where that wasn't a style that people thought of in terms of how Zerg played it. Zerg was the overwhelm you race, or it was like, you must hold against this sick Terran army that's coming out now, or you must meet them in the middle and just have the big battle. He pioneered the new style to his skills, and crucially, no one really could copy his style and come after him and just do what he did, in the same sense as all these examples I'm giving here. So there is a meta that makes sense, and we should have discussion about what is the best and all the rest of it. But I think if you look throughout history, there will always be cases in games, because it's a life principle, that the players who succeed the best, and not necessarily the best overall, but succeed the best that they can for themselves, tend to be the ones who are honest with what they have, and they look at it and they try and perfect what they can do the best that no one else can do.